How is it going, guys? Malagant here. We're going to be looking into offensive and defensive ability in Grim Dawn, and I'll try to make it as simple as possible so that if you're a new player or if you're just about to jump into Grim Dawn, you will kind of be knowledge about this too. So that being said, I have a lot of guides about Grim Dawn. If you would be interested, feel free to check out my YouTube channel. There'll be much more to come as well in the upcoming days, weeks, maybe even months. We'll see. So right off the bat, the simplest way to explain this is every single character in the game, they have their own baseline offensive and defensive ability. They have their own, numeric values in these offensive and defensive ability stats, let's say, including your character, right? So if you're curious about, what sort of like a very big boss or like a nemesis or even a super boss has their like stats when it comes to defensive ability or their own, offensive ability, you could come to monster database in Grim Tools, in fact, and then you could write their name, let's say maybe Kalagadra, the Scion of the Sands. Let's look at like the ultimate version, and over here we can see that like the Kalagadra is, hanging around with like 2.8k defensive ability and 2754 offensive ability. So this is pretty high actually. So every single character out there, as I said, have their own stats like these, and in Grim Dawn there's something very unique. The MI, the monster frequencies that are going to be dropping are going to be carrying and equipped at that moment from those monsters. So those monsters, if they're going to be dropping something extremely good when it comes to MIs, they're already equipping them while you're fighting them, then they're going to be boosted by these stats as well. So sometimes you might definitely end up finding yourself fighting something that's going to be feeling much more difficult than other times, simply because maybe they ended up rolling more resistance against you, or they have more HP, maybe more life steal, etc. You get what I mean. But so the offensive and defensive ability is going to be changing a little bit, also depending on what they are carrying and equipping at that moment that you're fighting against them. So your offensive ability versus your target's defensive ability is going to be basically deciding your hit chance and your crit chance against them. Furthermore, offensive ability is also capable of giving crit damage, but crit damage can be acquired a little bit more reasonably from a different stat called just crit damage itself. So for instance, these belts over here are giving on the first, you can see it on the first line, it says 5% crit damage. So from devotions, from skills, from modifiers, from components, from augments, and from items itself, you can actually gain crit damage, and it's a little bit easier to scale your crit damage from outer sources compared to offensive ability. But we will delve a little bit into this more further. So like, let's assume you're against like a peasant zombie, their defensive ability is going to be pretty low compared to like a boss, obviously, and you want to be, you don't want your offensive ability to be comparable to a zombie. You kind of want your offensive ability to be comparable in the late game to one of the hardest things, so that you still have a good hit chance and you have like a decentish chance to be critting this target, so that you can kill them in a relatively, safe way and at the same time relatively speedy way. Let's say again, let's go back to these values over here. It was like 2.8k defensive ability, so I would need to have at least 2.8k defensive ability to be able to hit Kalagadra to begin with, let alone critting him. And on top of that, my defensive ability is going to be going against Kalagadra's offensive ability, right? So I would need to have above 2.7k offensive ability, or defensive ability, to be able to, be crit immune against them. And at the same time have a little bit of like, above that is going to be giving me a little bit of like mischance to Kalagadra against me. So this is how it is basically against the targets around you. Your offensive ability, their defensive ability, this disparity is basically giving you the crit chance and the hit chance. So you want to be high, but being high against like skeletons or like, regular zombies, just like beasts around, that is not really what you're trying to do. You're trying to become very high with your offensive ability against the bosses. So the unique thing in this game is that like when you are becoming, higher than bosses, then you're this much bigger against the peasants. And now that is where the fun begins, because in the late game, when you're that much higher, that is when you start gaining the crit damage from offensive ability as well. When you are starting to gain that crit damage, your damage numbers, the colors are going to start changing as well. From, I think it becomes like from like whitish yellow into orange, and then finally like a reddish orange. Basically is like the highest cap, like the threshold that you can reach when it comes to crit damage from an offensive ability versus the enemy. So your damage numbers, you will be visually seeing them in like reddish numbers when they're popping up on your screen, because you're going to be gaining a lot of crit damage thanks to the disparity being way too high between your offensive ability and the monster's defensive ability. That is where you want to be reaching. When it comes to like numbers, most of the time my approach in the late game is about like 2.6k at the minimum defensive ability, and then offensive ability, again, the minimum is 2.7k, but like higher is so much better, and there is no threshold for that one. Like you want to get as much as you can, because you do want to get as much crit chance as you can against the relevant targets. 100%. What I would try to aim with a character like this one that I'm actively playing nowadays is probably going to be like 3.5k, but I'm not nowhere close to it yet. I would want to change a couple of pieces of gear that I'm wearing, and when I'm more comfortable, I would also want to be changing some of my augments. Especially I'm using some defensive augments right now, which is giving me health and defensive ability instead of like some offensive ability numbers. Right, so one last thing about the offensive and defensive ability is the fact that, like, don't forget that you can gain this stat from physique and cunning as well. So if you're at a state where like you feel your offensive ability is really low, and you have actual miss chance when you mouse over this versus your last enemy, then that means that like your offensive ability is pretty low. So you can fix this by, you know, committing a little bit into cunning, or you could do the same for the defensive ability. So against skilled archer, this character actually has no chance to be critted, and at the same time they have about like 76% chance to be hitting me. I have no idea about bosses, so I would need to go fight a boss and then check my defensive ability to see my stats against that particular boss. But if I wanted to gain a little bit more defensive ability, let's say I'm sitting at 2.5, I want to reach 2.6, I would, you know, I have the chance to look into, you know, committing into more physique as well. So if you would be interested in, you know, attributes guide, it's going to be on the top right section of the video right now. Check that out. And thank you so much for watching. I hope this was useful. I'm going to see you next time. Peace out, YouTube.